72 hostages sat playing chess above. 140 soldiers tunneled in silence, 8 meters below. For 4 months, neither group knew the other existed. December 17, 1996, Lima, Peru. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Japanese ambassador's residence in the San Isidro district was hosting a cocktail reception for Emperor Akihito's 63rd birthday. 600 guests had been invited: Peru's cabinet ministers, Supreme Court justices, military officers, foreign ambassadors from a dozen nations. They arrived in evening gowns and press suits. Waiters moved through the crowd with champagne trays. The whole place smelled like influence. Among those guests was Peru's Supreme Court Justice, Carlos Justi Acuña. He had spent decades climbing the Peruvian legal system. That evening, he was just a man at a party, holding a drink, talking to colleagues about nothing important. Around 20 past 8 in the evening, the north garden wall of the residence exploded inward. 14 members of the Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement, the MRTA, breached the perimeter within seconds. They wore black tactical gear and carried rifles and grenades. Within 3 minutes, they had 600 of Peru's most powerful people face down on a marble floor. What they didn't know was that this attack had been months in the making. The MRTA had spent weeks conducting reconnaissance, mapping every room of that residence. They knew where the circuit breakers were. They knew which exits locked from inside. They had timed the security rotation down to the minute. The rebels were led by Nestor Serpa Cardellini, the MRTA's operational commander. He had spent 15 years building an organization that most of the world had never heard of. The MRTA wasn't the shining path. They weren't death squads. In their own framing, they were revolutionary fighters demanding one thing: the release of over 400 MRTA prisoners held in Peruvian jails. What happened over the next 48 hours was methodical. Serpa released the women first, then the elderly, then the sick. Over the following days, he released more: diplomats whose governments had nothing to offer him, staff who served no political purpose. By Christmas week, the 600 had become 72. Here is what nobody thinks to ask about those first weeks inside. What do 72 hostages and 14 armed rebels actually do with 4 months? The answer is that they build a strange, involuntary routine. The hostages organized themselves. They held classes. They played chess. They read whatever books they could find. And every afternoon, every single afternoon, the MRTA rebels played futsal in the main hall. Indoor soccer on marble floors, boots squeaking, shouts echoing off the walls, the percussion of a bouncing ball against high ceilings. Outside, President Alberto Fujimori staged what looked like negotiations. Archbishop Juan Luis Cipriani served as a mediator. Red Cross representatives shuttled in and out. Japanese Prime Minister Ryutaro Hashimoto flew to Lima to personally involve himself. The global media watched every development. But Fujimori had already made his decision. There would be no prisoner release, not one. The meetings, the mediators, the televised diplomacy, all of it was theater, a performance designed to buy time, because underneath the residence, the real plan had already begun. The question the whole world was watching the wrong building to answer. If Fujimori wasn't going to negotiate, what exactly was happening in the neighborhood around that compound? 3 weeks into the standoff, Peruvian military engineers began to dig. The operation was codenamed Chavin de Huantar, after an ancient Peruvian archaeological site famous for its elaborate system of underground passageways. Converging beneath the ambassador's residence from different directions, with breach points emerging directly through the building's floors. 140 commandos from an elite Peruvian unit were selected and trained specifically for this operation. Intelligence services had obtained architectural blueprints of the residence. From those blueprints, engineers built a full-scale replica of the building. The commandos rehearsed the assault hundreds of times, room by room, staircase by staircase. Their target: neutralize every threat in under 20 minutes. But there was a problem. The tunneling had to happen in near silence. Any unusual vibration detected above, any acoustic anomaly, any crack in the plaster of a ceiling, and the entire operation would collapse before it started. 14 people holding rifles would know exactly where to point them. This is where the futsal matches changed everything. Those afternoon soccer games, the boots on hardwood that had seemed like evidence of the rebels' casual confidence, became acoustic cover for the engineers below. Every afternoon when the game started above, the drilling advanced below. The rebels were, without knowing it, providing the noise floor that concealed their own destruction. For 4 months, two parallel realities coexisted inside that building's footprint. Above, 72 hostages and 14 rebels in a strange, suspended routine. Below, a war being engineered in darkness, advancing by centimeters per day. Think about what that means for Carlos Giusti Acuna. For every night he lay on an improvised mattress on that marble floor, 4 months of nights, he was sleeping above a tunnel network that was growing beneath him. He had no way to know, none of them did. The building they believed was sealed and static was being hollowed out from underneath. Outside, the siege entered its 3rd month. News cycles moved on and returned. Families of hostages held vigils. The Red Cross delivered medicine and books into the compound. International observers praised Fujimori's patience. By March, the tunnels were complete. Commandos were in position beneath the floorboards. The replica training had been run reportedly over 300 times. In 22 days, 14 people inside that building would be dead. And in 18 years, the question of how exactly they died would be argued before an international court. Fujimori authorized the operation on April 22, 1997. That afternoon, the rebel soccer game was already scheduled. At 3:23 in the afternoon, the rebels were mid-game. Hostages had been moved quietly by arrangement with some of the rebels whose vigilance had softened after 4 months. Most of the 72 were upstairs. The MRTA fighters, as expected, as rehearsed, were concentrated on the ground floor. At 3:23, the floor of the main hall exploded upward. Simultaneously, exterior wall charges detonated on the building's sides. Commandos rappelled from helicopters onto the roof. 3 simultaneous breach points. Nestor Serpa and his fighters had no time to organize. No time to reach hostages. The tunnel operation had been designed specifically to deny them those 4 minutes. The 20-minute timeline wasn't ambition. It was mathematics. Military planners had calculated that if the rebels retained more than 4 minutes of initiative after the breach began, the hostage death toll would be catastrophic. Every element, the months of tunnel work, the acoustic cover of futsal games, the 300 rehearsals on the replica, all of it existed to compress those critical minutes to seconds. In roughly 20 minutes, all 14 MRTA rebels were killed. 2 Peruvian commandos died, Lieutenant Colonel Juan Valer Sandoval and Lieutenant Raul Jimenez Chavez. Both were killed on the upper floors during the clearing operation. And 1 hostage died, Carlos Giusti Acuna, the justice who had been holding a glass of wine at a birthday party 4 months earlier, who had survived 126 days of captivity, was struck by a bullet during the assault. The wound to his femoral artery triggered cardiac arrest. He was dead before reaching the hospital. 71 hostages walked out alive. Fujimori arrived by helicopter within the hour. Photographs of him standing in the compound rubble went around the world. His approval rating surged. The global press called it a textbook rescue. But here's what those photographs didn't show. And here's what some surviving hostages quietly began to say in the weeks that followed. Not all 14 rebels had died in combat. In the days after the operation, photographs began to surface. Peruvian journalists and international human rights observers noted something troubling about the positions and wounds of several rebel bodies. The angle of entry, the range. Some appeared to have been shot from close above, from a position that suggested the shooting happened after the fighting had ended. One case drew sustained attention. Eduardo Nicolás Cruz Sanchez, known inside the MRTA as Tito, was a senior commander. According to witness accounts and forensic evidence compiled years later, Tito had reportedly survived the initial assault. He had been photographed alive in custody by a commando inside the building. Then he appeared in the official death records with a bullet wound to the head. The Fujimori government denied everything. Official accounts held that all 14 rebels died in combat. Any other claim was MRTA propaganda designed to delegitimize a legitimate rescue operation. For years, that denial held. The political weight of a president who had just rescued 71 hostages in 20 minutes was enormous. Nobody wanted to examine the seams. But surviving hostages looked. Some had been in those rooms. Some had seen things in the final minutes inside the building that didn't fit the official timeline. When they began to speak, cautiously, through lawyers without their names attached, they described moments that kept appearing in witness statements. Rebels who had stopped moving, hands raised, a pause, then a single shot. The case moved through the Peruvian court system for years, then the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, then the Inter-American Court itself. In 2015, 18 years after the operation, Peru had violated the right to life of Eduardo Cruz Sanchez, an MRTA member the court found had been extrajudicially executed after being captured alive. 2 other deaths were examined, but the evidence was ruled insufficient. By that year, Fujimori was already serving a 25-year sentence in a Peruvian prison, not specifically for what happened inside the ambassador's residence, but for crimes committed by his government across the same years. Forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings carried out by the Colina death squad, systematic abuses that stretched far beyond that single afternoon in April. The embassy siege had made him a hero, but the same instinct, the refusal to negotiate, the elimination of witnesses, the compression of messy outcomes into clean official narratives, had defined his entire administration. What do you do with a story like this? The rescue was real, the heroism of those commandos was real, the lives saved were real, and the executions, if the court's findings are accurate, were real too. All of it in the same 20 minutes. All of it inside the same building. Here is the detail most people never hear. The 400-odd MRTA prisoners that Nestor Serpa had demanded. The entire reason 14 people stormed a birthday party and held a building for 4 months. Most of them remained in prison long after Serpa was dead. The demand that started everything was never met. Carlos Giusti Acuña's family received official condolences. Then silence. He had spent 4 months surviving something almost no one survives, only to die in the final minutes while soldiers swept the building he'd been held in. The 71 who walked out rebuilt their lives. Some spoke publicly, most didn't. Juan Valor Sandoval and Raul Jimenez Chavez were declared national heroes. Their names were placed on memorials. Schools were named after Valor Sandoval. The MRTA as an organization effectively ceased to exist after that afternoon. Serpa's death removed its leadership. Its prisoner demands remained unmet. And somewhere in a Peruvian archive, there are photographs of men in positions that the official record still does not fully explain. 126 days. 4 months of a parallel war dug in silence beneath the feet of people who had no idea. 20 minutes of assault. 71 lives rescued. 17 people dead. And a set of questions that an international court spent nearly 2 decades trying to answer, and still answered only in part. The ground beneath that residence was hollowed out to save lives. Whether the operation that saved them also ended some it didn't have to, that remains the unfinished sentence at the center of this story. If you want more stories like this, the events where the official record has edges that don't quite line up, we cover the history they left out of the textbooks.